Thank you very much, Chairperson. My name is Mmantsetsa Marope. I know it always intimidates people to pronounce it just by looking at how it's written.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. And I'm currently the director of the International Bureau of Education in Geneva. Those of you who know the history of UNESCO will know that the IBE actually precedes UNESCO. It was established in 1925 with Jean Piaget, the famous Swiss psychologist, as the first director. So that's the institute I am now directing. I must start by recognizing the Royal Highnesses in this room, Excellencies, the Director General Donfry, and distinguished conference delegates. It is really a pleasure to join you this very 9th of November to celebrate the fall of the physical Berlin Wall a quarter of a century ago. And I want to underline the physical because my speech is about the invisible walls of the 21st century world. And while it is easy to break down a physical wall, a wall that we can touch and feel and see, the invisible walls remain formidable. One could well ask, but why was this wall ever built in the first place? And I'm not going to venture into that history because I'm sure there are many more eloquent historians on the topic. But what I want to underscore is that ordinarily, normally, physical walls are built to separate people who are different in some form. They may be different in the complexion of their skin. They have a little bit more tone like me. They may be poorer. They may be of a different language. They may be of a different culture. They may be of many differences. But in this particular case, both sides of the wall were Germans, and sometimes even blood relatives. They clearly had tight cultural ties, and they had a strong desire to be together. They actually did not want to be separated, as is often the case, that when it comes to matters of colors, people want to be separated. So, what I want to focus on is, to my mind, I think the wall, the physical wall, was a manifestation of an idea. The divergence of ideas, the invisible wall, about what constitutes a democracy, what constitutes good economics, what constitutes good macroeconomic management, what constitutes good governance, and what is even a democracy. Needless to state that the other side of the wall, that was considered undemocratic by many, actually had the very word democracy in the title of its name. And this gives us a formidable food for thought. What is a democracy? What is a democracy? It isn't a surprise that we would argue about undemocratic rule on the side of the wall that called itself a democracy. Because for centuries, countries that call themselves democracies shipped Africans packed like sardines, like boxes in ships, and then spent them like horses and cows to plow their fields and to create formidable economies. And these were democracies. Countries that wrote in the entrances of churches, natives and dogs not allowed, were called democracies. Today, women and girls are sold in the market like commodities in countries that are called democracies. So what is it? Democracy is an idea, isn't it? The clash is when your idea of a democracy does not resonate with mine, And I insist, or you insist, that my idea or your idea should be this idea. I'm sorry to use a church example, but no offense intended. The trouble is when we want to convert one another to our ideas. The even bigger and deeper trouble is when these democracies are not experienced by the people. So let me go back to the Berlin Wall and say the beauty of defining democracy for me was the smiles on the people's faces when this wall went down. The real people to whom democracy is a manifestation of their will to be together, their will to live harmoniously together, their will to grow their economies together, their will to define themselves and to be self-determining. That is the democracy. But it is in the will of the people. It is not in the rulers or leaders who define democracy in their own way, package it, and want to sell these packages as the package of the day and the package that should determine. That is the invisible wall. We could ask, since the physical wall broke down, have our ideas of democracies and the insistence of one being the democracies fallen? I'm not too sure. So let me move then to what I believe, in my view, are the most formidable walls, invisible walls of the 21st century. I am standing in an institute that intends to build peace through intercultural relations into intercultural exchange. And as you well know, UNESCO just ended within a decade of the rapprochement de culture. So we do recognize culture as an instrument of rapprochement. At the same time, we do have to acknowledge that culture can be an invisible wall in the 21st century. When people are born, they can live in any culture. If a newborn child is taken anywhere in any culture, they can embrace that culture, celebrate that culture. The problem is not in the diversity of cultures. The problem is when one culture wants to say their way is the way. So it is the idea of supremacy, the idea of correctness, the idea of superiority, and more importantly, the pretense of having the knowledge of what is right and the pretense of the exactitude of how cultures should interact or what appropriate culture should be. So within cultures, because we talk of intercultural exchanges across different cultures, but I want to underscore, even within cultures, we can have formidable invisible walls. When a culture dictates that women should be suppressed within one culture and builds invisible walls for women, it insists, a culture, that women must wear a particular garb, whether or not I'm in the mood. This morning when I wake up, I choose what I wear. But if somebody pre-selects what I should wear and every day I should do that, that is an invisible wall, and it's cultural, and it's a gender wall. When cultures say that homosexuality is a damnation and builds walls for that sexual orientation, that is an invisible wall. When a culture says there is a superior language, there is a superior ethnicity, there is a superior caste, there is a lower caste, that is an invisible wall. And these are the damning walls of the 21st century. They are not just about cultures interacting across borders, but even within borders, cultures can be invisible walls. The challenge is, how do we break these invisible walls? I want to also highlight language, which is part of culture, you could say. But because language can be an invisible wall when it prevents you to partake in just about every aspect of your life, which matters. And in this particular case, I want to use Africa. Most African countries have many, many languages within the country. And then they have to choose a national language. And this means for those who do not come from the national language, whose mother tongue is not the national language, they may face many walls in their daily life trying to interact. Furthermore, by some accident of history or design, I don't know, Africa is divided into foreign languages. It is the only continent I know of, I may be wrong, that is divided according to languages that are not their languages. And therefore, somebody has the heart to call me Anglophone. I am not Anglophone. I speak English. And when a Danish speaks English, they are not called Anglophone Dane. They are just called a Danish. So I'm an African, and I'm a Tswanaphone, but I'm not Anglophone. But Africa is divided into these linguistic walls, Anglophone, Lusophone, Francophone, and heaven knows how many Africans actually speak this language. The invisible wall is that much of the business, the political dialogue, the social dialogue, the economic dialogue, dialogue about rights, is conducted in these inaccessible languages to the majority of the people, which means that the life of people are decided through a language that carries content that is inaccessible, and therefore these people are walled from participating. That's why participatory democracy is so difficult when you don't understand even the discourse that you are supposed to participate in. This is a formidable wall, particularly in Africa, but also in multilinguistic countries. I can go on, but I want to quickly come to education, because I want to stand here and say the modern boundary between countries, between rich and poor countries, is the quality of their education. The modern boundary between rich and poor people is the quality of education one has the opportunity to have. And every day we see millions and millions of children going to school, and millions of them not learning. We have the statistics, we chant them every year. 130 million primary school kids who are enrolled in primary schools, finish primary schools without having acquired sustainable literacy. Have you tried to navigate yourself through an airport in a language that you cannot read and taste? What does it feel like to be illiterate every day? These are some of the invisible walls of the 21st century that if we do not break down, we will perpetuate inequalities, and when inequalities escalate, they become social incohesion, and they become social fracture, and they become political instability, and then we have all sorts of springs, however way we may call them. So education quality is one of the most formidable walls today, because education is the most formidable distributors of life chances. If you don't have good quality education, a lot of opportunities for you are walled. You hit a wall, you try to get a job. You hit a wall when you try to talk to other people. We are here in this room today because somebody cared to give us a good quality education. And those of ours who didn't get it are not here, and they have a wall entering these types of rooms that we are in, where we talk about them and not to them or with them. And we talk for them because we start to assume the exactitude of that knowledge that I started with. So this is a very serious problem. And just quickly to say the magnitude, I talked about 57 million kids who should be in primary education are not in primary schools. We still have 774 million youth and adults who are illiterate. 63 million adolescents are not in school, and 126 million youth do not have the chance to acquire competencies for employability and for life. And can you imagine what this precipitates into? Another invisible wall of the 21st century, capability poverty. Because when you are materially poor, it's visible. We can see this person is hungry. They are not dressed. They are cold. They are malnourished. But you cannot necessarily see the capability poverty that accrued from somebody having a short end of the stick when it comes to their opportunity for education. And a capability poverty builds walls for your employment, for your capability to earn income, and then it winds up being material and physical poverty. And this is a very important restriction. It's a very formidable form of exclusion, and it's a very formidable form of inequality. Let me then quickly go to wars and conflicts. Where do these wars come from? Some of them are economic, because we want to loot one another's resources, and then we can come up with all sorts of excuses why we should go to war. Some of them are religious, because again, somebody insisting that their religion is the religion to which others should be converted, refusal to accept diversity. Some of them are cultural, linguistics, and so on and so forth. But the reality of the war is that those who brew wars build walls for those who have to be afflicted by it. Just between 2012 and 2013, 6 million more people were displaced by wars. As we stand, about 52 million people are displaced by wars. That's a whole country. If you could imagine one country just be displaced, one big country, 50 million people is a lot. So how can we break these walls? I want to go. The former speaker, the first speaker, made it easy for me, that I work for an organization whose constitution recognizes the invisible wall, which is the ideas. The ideas, by saying in the constitution, and since wars begin in the minds of men. This is the only time I agree when gender imbalanced words is used. Since wars are created in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that defenses of peace must be constructed. Unless we touch the minds, unless we reorient people's thinking, unless we drop the insistence that my idea is the idea, or shall I say, unless men drop this. I have to say that we have changed the statement to say they're built in the minds of women and men, and I was very disappointed. It's never built in the minds of women, come on. But here we are also promoting gender equality, so we have to show gender balance in our statement. But those who drafted the first constitution, I think they nailed it right. So, I would say touching the mind starts with education, and I'm not talking about formal education in schools only. I'm talking about popular education, formal education, informal education, non-formal education. That really, really teaches diversity. Because if in school, children are taught all men were made equal, and then they get home, and I tell them somebody is not equal to me because the color of their skin is just a little different from mine. These kids get this stereo mix. They get all these inputs that are contradictory, and somewhere along the line, they have to make their decisions, but why create cacophony in their minds if we could create a symphony? By passing the same message over and over and over. So, to my mind, multicultural education, education that emphasizes that different is just different. Just because things are different does not mean one is inferior. This is the problem. We have a different form of governance. It serves the will of the people. That's enough. Let's not insist. We have a different form of worship, we have a different form of dress, and so on and so forth. And if these differences meet the will of the people and raise the sense of fulfillment and happiness and enjoyment of life by the people, then why should we insist on making the world the same? What would we get from the sameness? We should insist on equity of education quality, and we should break the hegemony of the so-called languages and stop closing the labor markets and open so that diversity can thrive, and perhaps we can slowly begin to approximate unity in diversity and begin to enjoy multiculturalism and use culture not as a wall, but as an open space where we can enjoy the diversity of who we are. Thank you very much again, Chairperson.